From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. Our top story tonight concerns the voting restrictions bill in Texas. In a desperate move to block the passage of a restrictive voting rights bill in Texas, the state's House Democrats have fled to Washington, D.C. in chartered planes. Their actual whereabouts are being kept secret because they can be legally compelled to return. Texas state House rules require a 2/3 quorum to pass the legislation. There are only 27 days remaining in the 30-day special session convened by Texas Governor Greg Abbott to pass this bill. Senate Bill 7 would make using mail-in ballots harder. It would also ban drive-through voting centers and 24 hours voting. As well, it gives greater authority to poll watchers. At least 14 states have enacted laws this year that tighten rules around casting ballots. In the meantime, House Democrats are asking the U.S. Senate to exempt the voting rights bill from a filibuster. A filibuster exception would allow them to push through their voting rights reform bill over unanimous Republican opposition. Next Tuesday has been declared the day of Eid al-Adha. It will mark the 10th day of the Islamic month of Dhul Hijjah of the year 1442. In Nigeria, the declaration was made by the Sultan Sotoko Sa'ad Abdul Bakr III. Similar announcements have been made around the world. The first Eid, called Eid al-Fitr, marks the end of Ramadan, the month of fasting. The second, called Eid al-Adha, is connected to Hajj, the fifth pillar of Islam. Muslims who are physically and financially able are required to complete the Hajj at least once in their lifetimes. Hajj is built around the struggles of Prophet Abraham, his wife Hajar, and their son Prophet Ismail, peace be upon them all. Normally, 2 to 3 million people from around the world perform Hajj. However, due to the ongoing pandemic, this year's pilgrimage has been limited to 60,000 vaccinated citizens and residents of Saudi Arabia. Federal prisons in the United States are facing a large shortage of Muslim chaplains. There are over 11,000 Muslims in these prisons nationwide. They're served by only 11 chaplains. In contrast, there's a far larger proportion of Christian chaplains. 84% of all chaplains are Protestant Christians, while serving only 34% of the prisoner population. The rules to qualify as a federal prison chaplain are also archaic and often do not reflect the reality of what the chaplain does. Age limit requirements exclude older, retired Muslims who are otherwise capable of serving as imams. Other educational and certification requirements do not recognize the prevailing practice of how imams are trained in Muslim traditions. Italy won the Euro 2020 soccer final against England. The Italians won the cup in an overtime shootout where 3 of England's black players missed their mark. This led to online trolling and racist slurs posted to social media condemning the 3 black players. Over 1,000 racist comments were posted on Twitter. They were immediately removed and several accounts were suspended. A political scientist has been using creative ways to research bias against Muslims in Germany. Nicholas Sambanis and his team studied why some Europeans discriminate against Muslim immigrants and are trying to find ways to reduce this prejudice. He conducted his research in Germany because of the greater welcome of asylum seekers than any other European country. His work drew upon the responses of 3,700 subjects who were unknowingly expressing their opinions to his team of researchers in train stations across 25 cities. Sambanis devised creative ways to elicit reactions to a contrived situation. For example, a native German woman or an immigrant of Middle Eastern descent wearing a hijab pretending to audibly talk on the phone to her sister. The conversation was about whether she should work outside the home or stay at home and take care of her family. Following the call, she drops a bag of lemons near a group of bystanders who have likely heard her phone conversation. The setup showed that the German women helped the woman pick up her groceries if she encouraged her sister to work outside the home during the phone call. They were less helpful if the Middle Eastern woman did not. For men, on the other hand, the caller sharing her views on the women working made no difference on whether they helped pick up the groceries or not. Sambanis co-authored the study with Danny Choi at the University of Pittsburgh and Matthias Partner at Texas A&M University. It was published on July 8th in the American Journal of Political Science. It confirmed that significant discrimination is prevalent against Muslim women in their daily dealings with Germans. It also showed that shared values and views can overcome some, but not all, prejudice. In international news, Palestinians demonstrated in front of the Israeli Ofer prison near Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. They were demanding the release of Khalda Jarrar after her daughter died in Ramallah last night. Jarrar is the author and elected member of the Palestinian parliament. She was held in an Israeli jail for more than a year without charges. Later, an Israeli military court sentenced her to 2 years in prison for being a member of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Her case demonstrates how military courts are forced upon an elected member of the Palestinian parliament by Israel. Jarrar has been actively working on women's rights and the affairs of prisoners in Israeli jails. There are 4,500 Palestinians in Israeli prisons, including the 82-year-old man who has been behind bars since 2001, according to the Palestinian Prisoners Club NGO. 430 Palestinians are currently detained without any charge or trial. Those being detained include 180 children and 41 women and girls. Israel routinely detains Palestinians without charges, including children. It does not do that to Jews. These are the practices for which Human Rights Watch and Bet Shalom accuse Israel of apartheid. Burma's shadow government is breaking taboos in the country by welcoming Rohingyas into its anti-junta coalition. However, Rohingya who are subjected to genocide over the last 4 years are wary of living through decades of discrimination and violence. Burma has been in turmoil since the government of Aung San Suu Kyi, who was ousted in a February coup. This sparked huge pro-democracy protests and a bloody military crackdown. Dissident lawmakers from Suu Kyi's party dominate a national unity government in exile. They're rallying support for the resistance amongst foreign governments and on international news broadcasts. Last month, they invited the Rohingya to join hands to end military rule. They promised to repatriate those who fled to Bangladesh after a deadly 2017 military assault on their communities in Burma. They also pledged to grant citizenship to Rohingyas who was taken away from them in 1982. Despite the overtures, there are no Rohingya representatives amongst the National Unity Government's current 32-member cabinet. And Suu Kyi remains largely silent during the Burmese military's campaign of genocide against the Rohingya. She was in power at that time. Rohingya are the indigenous people of Burma living in their ancestral land in Burma until the Burmese military forced them to Bangladesh. Most now live as refugees in Bangladesh in barbed wire camps. There are, however, about 500,000 Rohingyas who are internally displaced or detained in camps. AFP reached some Rohingya close to Sitwe who live in huts after their homes were burnt down in 2012. One Rohingya in the camp's Waimar told AFP he was worried that his community exists only to be human shields or scapegoats in Burma. In the meantime, the Burmese military has increased its attacks on civilians. Going digital has not made us dumber after all, according to a new study. Researchers at the University of Cincinnati and the University of Toronto found that smart technology supplements thinking, thus helping us to excel. Professor Anthony Chemero co-authored the new paper, which was published in the scientific journal Nature Human Behavior. He said that there's no scientific evidence that shows that smartphones and digital technology harm our biologically cognitive abilities. On the contrary, Chemero said that they change the way in which we engage them in ways that are actually beneficial. He added that smart technology frees up brain energy to think about other things. Pain often leads to creativity. Emotions which can be channeled into art run high during war. Ali Khalaf and Saleha Farouk take us to occupied Palestine, where an artist uses bombed building material for his art.
When you walk in the midst of ruins, you start spotting objects. Demolished buildings are all around Mohammed el-Shanbari, mostly as a result of Israel bombing occupied Palestine. Mohammed's job is bodybuilding, but his passion is art. He grew up in a simple household in the city of Beit Hanun in the occupied Gaza Strip. That is where he works as a trainer. Life around Mohammed is not balanced. Israel has buildings, and the occupied Gaza has bombed out buildings. Jews can get building permits, but Palestinians cannot. Jews can travel freely, Palestinians cannot. This is where his artist's eye started wandering. He loves to find balance by balancing objects found in the bombed out buildings. And whenever Israel is not blocking the internet, Mohammed watches artists on the internet.
Every time I walk in the street, I see destroyed houses due to the latest war with Israel. So I thought I should balance bricks taken from the destruction caused by Israel.
He improved his talent by watching YouTube videos. When Mohammed cannot get out, he uses his home objects for his art. The home furniture, glass bottles, wood, and appliances, including his television set, are all objects which Mohammed can use for his art.
With practice, I became aware that the art of balancing depends on the fulcrum of objects. Based on this, I worked on my talent until I was able to balance objects on a moving body and on the surface of water. Praise be to God, He helped me, and people started encouraging me to continue practicing this talent of mine.
Mohammed is married and has one child. He wishes that his child will grow up free. And when the Israeli blockade of Gaza ends, his son might be able to get real art supplies instead of using the rubble of Gaza's bombed out houses. One day, inshallah.
Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Welcome back. The heat wave on the West Coast is claiming human and marine lives as temperatures crossed 100 degrees over the last few weeks. To discuss the effects of the heat wave, we have Professor Christopher Harley, a marine biologist, joining Saleha Farouk. Over to you, Saleha.
Thank you so much once again. Today, we're very happy to be joined by Christopher Harley, who is a professor as well as a marine biologist at the University of British Columbia. Christopher, in light of recent extreme weather events in Canada, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me on.
Our pleasure. Now, to begin with, please talk to us about the seismic effects of the heat wave. For example, not only has this been linked to numerous human deaths, unfortunately, but also there have been numerous ecological consequences across Canada.
Yeah, and I certainly don't want to downplay the human toll, but the toll on wildlife has also been really unprecedented. The shorelines around Vancouver, around Victoria, a lot of British Columbia and Washington were really severely affected by the 3 very hot days that we had. And the number of dead and dying mussels and sea stars and snails and barnacles and seaweeds, it was really something I'd never seen before. It was pretty staggering to contemplate.
Now, in a recent interview with the CBC, you also mentioned the potential long-term impacts of losing mussels as well as certain sea wildlife creatures. With so many organisms having to rely on one another in order to survive, what is the link between climate change and species survival?
In a lot of ways, the intertidal zone, so the area between high tide and low tide, is the sort of warning system for climate change, because a lot of the plants and animals that live there are already living very close to what they can tolerate. So getting just a little bit hotter, we start to see changing patterns. And when it gets a lot hotter, that's when we see a lot of things die. And I'm expecting that we will start to replace some of the species we have in British Columbia now with species that live usually in warmer climates, and our overall diversity is likely to go down as a result of increased warming.
Thank you for that insight. Now, with so many numerous seashore species as well as plants falling victim to global warming, is it possible, do you think, for humans to be able to sustain animal populations directly impacted in this manner?
Yes, I'm certainly not giving up hope, but it will become more challenging. And it's not just animals. I think about the cherry growers and the raspberry growers who have lost a big chunk of their crops during the heat wave also. The challenge is not just that it's getting warmer. So it's not just that, well, Canada will start growing things that the US used to grow and the US will grow things that Mexico used to grow. The extremes are also getting more severe. And so the heat wave that we've just lived through on the West Coast was maybe a once in 1,000 year event before climate change. And it might become a once every 5-year event with climate change. And if that happens, it would be very difficult for certain agriculture industries to stay in business and certain shellfish farms to continue to produce shellfish in the way that we're used to doing it now.
Now, when it comes to species protection, are global nations, in your opinion, sufficiently meeting their commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? And would you say that that would be the solution to this crisis at this time?
Well, there's sort of long-term solutions and short-term solutions. And the long-term solutions are countries at the global level start to act a little bit more aggressively to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And I actually draw a lot of inspiration from the COVID pandemic. Like climate change, that is a big, scary thing. It is hard to figure out how to approach it. But we managed to make some small changes. And if enough people, stand a little farther apart or put on a mask to go grocery shopping, those differences really add up. So I think we can get there at the global level with some effort. There's also things we can do at the local level. We know that if you conserve species that are in the system right now, the more players you can keep in the game, the less the impacts of any particular heat wave might be. So even if you're waiting for, the US government or the Chinese government to make big steps, you can also do things at the very local scale to protect a shoreline or to protect an ecosystem that you care about.
Just building on those local actions that you mentioned, do you believe that such extreme weather events have helped people understand the importance of environmental protection as it relates to animal species survival? And what are some calls to action that you recommend to protect ecological populations around us?
I hope this has been something of a wake-up call, but we've had a lot of them. There have been storms and there have been other heat waves in the past, and it seems like interest goes up a little bit and then it sort of declines until the next thing happens. But there are just so many, and they're going to be coming fast and furious now. And one of my colleagues said, there is no normal anymore. There's not even a new normal to get used to. Things are just changing so fast. In terms of actions we can take, yes, we could all make big changes and stop driving cars completely and stop eating meat completely and doing a lot of things that would be challenging and in some cases unpopular. We don't have to go completely over in that direction. We can just make little steps. If everybody just thought about their diet a little tiny bit, or if everybody was able to drive a little bit less, the fact that we can do this electronically instead of in person means that we didn't have to use burn any greenhouse gases to have this interview. So there's lots of little things we can do that will reduce our carbon footprint. And if enough people are doing those small things, even if it's just a few at a time, that all adds up.
We wanted to be advantageous of your presence here and talk to you a little bit about how in Canada's Pacific Northwest, over 180 wildfires have emerged because of the heat wave and lightning strikes, of course. What do people need to know about climate change making these heat waves more frequent and more intense?
Yeah, we've always had heat waves, and people who are skeptical of climate change say, well, we've always had cycles in climate, and that's also true. The problem is we've taken those natural long-term cycles and natural variability and tipped it all upwards so that the new baseline is just higher. And so when you get a cycle that goes to warmer temperatures, it becomes unusually high. And when you get a heat wave, it becomes record-setting high. The fact that Canada just set its all-time record is an indication of that happening. So as we are warming things up on average, we're also seeing these heat waves arrive more frequently, and they're more severe when they happen. And the ecosystems just haven't adjusted to that yet. We still have cool climate forests dealing with a warm climate, country. And there'll be more fires like this, unfortunately, until the system changes enough to be a little bit more of a fire-resistant system. But that might not be what people in British Columbia want.
You talked a little bit about things that we can do on a local level, but just looking at power holders, so people in governments, people at the United Nations, and as we wrap up our interview today, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals dedicated an entire goal to climate action, not to mention the 2015 Paris Agreement, of course. Are global nations, in your view, being responsible in meeting their commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
Oh, I'd say that there's good progress being made, but that it is slower than we could do. And there's been a lot of talk of, well, we should limit things to only 1.5 degrees of warming. And if we can't do that, we should limit things to 2 degrees of warming. And those are nice targets, but really what I think we need to do is, and it would be great if we could, but just like with the pandemic, where we're trying to bend the curve, if we can just slow down the rate of change enough, that is buying us time. And it buys us time to shift towards more renewable energy sources like solar and wind. And are nations moving quickly enough? Probably not. Could they move more quickly than they are now? Definitely. Is there the political will to force them to? That's the big question.
An insightful conversation with Professor Christopher Harley, who is a professor as well as a marine biologist at the University of British Columbia. Professor Chris, thank you again for your time today.
It's been a pleasure.
Back to the new studio.
Thank you, Saleha and Professor Harley. Before moving on to our next analysis, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
The death toll in South Africa's violent protests against the imprisonment of former President Jacob Zuma has risen to 72, with hundreds of protesters detained. Meanwhile, Amnesty International South Africa Executive Director Shenilla Mohamed has also called for restraint from protesters and the police. Shenilla Mohamed is joining Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid for a detailed conversation. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Hena. As many as 45 people have been killed in the Nelson Mandela's country, South Africa. It is the worst violence, media is saying, in South Africa since the end of apartheid. All highways in South Africa are shut down because of the protest, the people demanding the release of the former President Zuma, who was detained because for the contempt of the court. All of this is happening while the country is in a strict lockdown because of the Delta variant of COVID, which came from India. But there is an Indian family, Gupta family, whose ties to President Zuma are the cause of the scandal on which he was being tried for the corruption. Our guest is from South Africa to explain what is going on her street and around. Shenilla Mohamed, welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Assalamu alaikum. Well, thank you so much.
Shenilla Mohamed is Executive Director of Amnesty International South Africa, as well as a writer and a journalist. Please update us. What is happening? What is the current situation?
Well, as you rightly said in your introduction, we, ever since our former president Jacob Zuma has been facing a number of charges that have been linked to corruption, and he was summoned to appear before the Zondo Commission, which has been set up to deal with the issues of state capture and corruption, and he refused to appear before the Zondo Commission. He was then instructed by the Constitutional Court to do so. He again refused to do so, and so he was cited for contempt of court and was sentenced to 15 months imprisonment. Now, following his imprisonment, of course, many of his supporters, were declaring that they were going to make the country ungovernable, that they were going to bring the country to its knees and its economy to its knees. And so what we've been seeing since Saturday has been exactly that. We have been seeing riots, protest action, and most importantly, we've been seeing looting, lawlessness and anarchy. Now, according to the South African Constitution, Section 17 of the Constitution, everyone has the right to protest, but only if it's done peacefully and without weapons. So what these people are doing falls entirely outside the Constitution, and it's all, sort of against the law. It's criminal and it's lawlessness.
Which city in South Africa are you right now?
I'm in Johannesburg. So the two cities that the most badly affected, or the two provinces, should I say, are, Gauteng, which is where Johannesburg is, and KwaZulu-Natal, where Durban is. And Durban is actually worse hit than Johannesburg. But, we have seen a lot of damage in Johannesburg as well.
So how are your cities safe? Is your community safe?
Well, unfortunately, we even before these riots, we live behind, high walls and security estates because South Africa has a very high crime rate. But, with these particular riots, I think that there's a lot of anxiety amongst, most of the people who live in this country because the riots are sporadic. You don't know where they're going to start. You don't know who's going to, start them. They happen at any time. But I think, the worst thing about these riots is the destruction of infrastructure. Entire shopping malls have been burnt down. There's been, as you rightly said, 45 people have lost their lives. And of course, there's been looting and excessive looting. Entire shops have been stripped of everything, including, the hardware in the shops, the benches in the malls. And, the worst thing is once the looting has taken place, then they destroy. So, trucks are being burnt down, cars are being burnt down, journalists are being attacked. So it's really quite a difficult and horrible situation that we're facing in South Africa at the moment.
Is Johannesburg, you have been living all your life there. Has it been this worse before?
Well, South Africa has a history of protest action, and that stemmed from the apartheid era days when, the people took to the streets to fight against apartheid. And this has continued post-independence where, South Africans will often take to the street if they are unhappy about service delivery or wages or something like that. So we are not, protest is part of our existence here. But this level of violence we have not seen since independence, since 1994. And the level of looting, the level of criminality, is a new phenomenon to South Africa. And, again, the argument that is being put forward is that, a lot of these people are poor and, are taking advantage of the situation. But, as Amnesty International, our argument is that, you cannot deal with poverty and inequality by resorting to criminality and lawlessness. We recognize that South Africa has got one of the highest inequality rates in the world, and there's a lot of poverty in this country. But lawlessness, looting, criminality is not the answer. So what we're seeing at the moment is opportunistic sort of criminality. And yes, it started off in the name of Jacob Zuma, but it has, emerged into something which is just pure violence and criminality.
But why people love former President Zuma so much that they are willing to risk their lives?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer because, on the one hand, you would think that people would be upset with him because, as you were saying in the beginning, he has been accused of engaging in, corrupt activities with an Indian family called the Guptas. A multi-million rand commission of inquiry has been set up to investigate this, and billions of rand has been lost in this so-called state capture between the Zuma presidency and the Guptas. So you would expect that people would really dislike him. But a lot of his supporters are in KwaZulu-Natal, which is where he comes from. And, so there is that support base that he has there. And, it's really about, the fact that one of their people is in jail, and, it's an ethnic sort of support base. But also, it's very easy to use poor people. It's very easy to instrumentalize poor people when you want something done. So, many of the people that are involved in this looting, we don't know whether they are actual supporters or whether they're just being used in order to give the impression that, there's a big following behind him. But he does have a support base. The support base is mostly in KwaZulu-Natal, and I think it's all based on ethnicity. He is a Zulu, and the people of KwaZulu-Natal are mostly Zulus.
Now, tell us a little bit about the court. Wasn't he? Are there? You being the executive director of Amnesty International, do you think the process of the court has been fair towards him?
I think that, the one thing that South Africa has, which is lauded around the world, is our very, very admirable constitution and legal framework. And we have a very independent judiciary. And so, what the whole process that was followed that led us to former President Zuma being sentenced to 15 months was really due process according to the legal framework. So, he was summoned, he was given ample opportunity to present his case, even before the Constitutional Court decided on what sanction they should give him for contempt. They reached out to him and they asked him, what sanction he thought he should be getting, but he refused to cooperate at every level. And the Constitutional Court had no other choice but to uphold the rule of law and to sentence him to imprisonment, because the other thing was that he was extremely defiant. And even the Sunday before he was, he had to hand himself in, he was very defiant. He was very clear that he was not going to hand himself over. So in order to uphold the rule of law, there was no other choice but to imprison him, because, I think the Constitutional Court felt that he had been warned on a number of occasions, and those warnings were not heeded. And in this situation, it would still have been the same thing. He would have not bothered. He would have, ignored the courts and the justice system. And so they had to take back their power, and they had to dish out quite a severe penalty.
Are these reports accurate, which say that it was the President Jacob Zuma who himself established the court which is investigating it? Is it correct?
It's absolutely correct. So the establishment of the State Capture Commission of Inquiry was part of a recommendation that came out of a report by the former public protector, Advocate Thuli Madonsela. And in her report, where she was investigating reports of state capture and corruption, she recommended to the president that a state capture inquiry be set up. And it was during the time of President Zuma that Advocate Madonsela handed over her report. And President Zuma then, as the president at the time, gave the order for the establishment of the State Capture Commission, and also appointed Justice Raymond Zondo, who is now the acting Chief Justice, to actually head it. So it's very ironic that, one of his arguments for not appearing before the Zondo Commission is that he has no faith in Justice Zondo, that he feels Justice Zondo is biased, etc., when he, in fact, was the one who not only established the commission, but also appointed Justice Zondo to head the commission.
Shenilla Mohamed, what are your thoughts about why there's so much focus on President Zuma, while the Gupta family is the one who is accused of multiple levels of corruptions?
I don't think that it's just a focus on President Zuma. I think that if you the State Capture Commission has looked at every aspect and has talked to everyone. I mean, the Guptas were subpoenaed, and as we all know, they are sitting in Dubai, and they are not coming to South Africa. So they have been subpoenaed. They have refused to come forward. However, South Africa has implemented a number of legal activities to try to bring them back to South Africa, including the signing of an extradition treaty with the UAE. And it's hoped that, we will be able to bring the Guptas back. So it's not true that it's only a focus on President Zuma. The reason we're dealing with this right now is because President Zuma has refused to cooperate with the Zondo Commission, whereas all the other people who have been implicated, who have been accused, have appeared before the Zondo Commission. And that's why there appears to be a focus on Jacob Zuma, but actually it's because of his own actions.
You used the term about this Indian family of Guptas as capturing the state. What do you mean by capturing the state?
So what we mean by state capture is that, they literally, to some extent, were de facto running parts of the government while President Zuma was the president. So, for example, the evidence that was presented before the Zondo Commission was that, they even decided which ministers were going to be given which portfolios. And they knew before the ministers, and they would summon the ministers to their houses and inform them that they were going to be given these portfolios. So really, it was the state capture goes beyond mere corruption. It goes to the actual heart of taking over functions of the state that really they had absolutely no right to do. And that door was opened for them by the Zuma government. And so when we talk about state capture, we are not only talking about corruption, because corruption has been huge. The tenders, the millions and billions of rand that they have stolen and money laundered, etc., through the South African government. But we're talking about something even worse. We're talking about a family from India that was literally running major parts of the government during President Zuma's time.
Why judicial system was not strong enough and independent enough to take an action when President Zuma and Gupta family from India were collaborating in running the government, a non-elected business party, a capitalist trying to control a major nation?
Well, because it wasn't blatant. It wasn't, out there. It was being done behind the scenes. There were secret meetings that were being held at their homes. So a lot of this evidence has come to light during the Zondo Commission, where people have now started. And, the one thing to remember is that a lot of this was exposed by the media in South Africa. So the South African media has played a phenomenal role in exposing corruption. And, and in fact, a lot of the journalists have also suffered threats and attacks on their character, etc., by many Zuma supporters. But this was not being done in an overt way. It was being done in a covert way, in the shadows, and that is why it took so long. And of course, there were many. President Zuma did not do this by himself, and so there were many people complicit, people in his government, people in local municipalities who were complicit in all of this. And I think the State Capture Commission is now exposing all of these people. And so now we're beginning to piece together what is the real story. During President Zuma's time, a lot of it was hidden. So when a minister was appointed, the assumption was the minister was appointed by the president. It's only now that we're realizing that the hand that the Guptas had in all of this.
Shenilla Mohamed is the executive director of Amnesty International in South Africa. I hope you stay safe, because the COVID, we heard, is also rampaging in South Africa at this moment.
Thank you so much. And to be honest, one of the things that these protest actions have actually done is they've brought a halt to the vaccination program in a country that was already behind when it came to vaccinations. And so this is another very concerning situation for us. And so, our hope is that the army, along with the police, will bring the situation under control as soon as possible and allow the healing and the coming back together. South Africans are tough, and we will survive this, but I feel like COVID has added to the challenge, and our numbers are continuing to rise on a daily level. We're having 200, 300 deaths a day, and so the situation needs to be brought under control, and our vaccination program has to be allowed to continue.
Thank you so much, Shenilla Mohamed. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much. Wa alaikum salam.
Back to you, Hena.
Thank you so much for that analysis. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube and Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.